Surprise, we're back. Pen Night Radio is proud to bring you Drop a Line, 60-minute interviews with authors, artists, and indie creatives from around the world. These are the stories behind the stories. Please enjoy this short video while we introduce our next guest. That gets the blood pumping, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to introduce our guest. This is Helena Key, who you've seen on the podcast before, back when it was just called Drop a Line, when the shows were separate. They, of course, have been brought together, and Helena has graciously agreed to appear on the show. Helena is an author of a wonderful book called Beyond, and is also the founder of, I hope I'm saying this right, Ina Joy Books.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us, Helena. How are you this evening?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. And you know something? You must get so frustrated on a spiritual level with us Americans, because I feel like I ask you this question every time. But what time is it by you?
It's 20 past midnight.
20 past midnight. My goodness.
Yeah.
You know something? I feel awful. I
No,
have
it's fine.
been.
Technically, it's early, so it's fine.
Well, there you go. There you go. I mean, it's just now that I'm a teacher, I am no longer a night owl, and I've been trying to pick myself up off the ground to make this recording. And then I remember that while you're sitting there waiting patiently for me, it's midnight by you. And that thought is just horrifying to me.
I'm used to it. I do a lot of my best thinking at night anyway.
That's amazing. So, Helena, what are you thinking about at this fine hour?
Just weirdly how dark it is compared to where you are, most likely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just gotten dark here, but I'm going to pull the mic a little closer just to make sure I'm not talking away from it. But we have had we had a lot of sunshine for most of September, and the past week it's just been rain, just gray,
Yes.
stormy rain. And of course I'm not complaining, because I know it's coming off the back of terrible storms everywhere. But I'm just saying, like, it's definitely been a dark time. Whoopsie. That's all right.
Yeah, we're good.
So, Helena, it's always good to talk to you. On the podcast tonight, we were talking about writing under pressure.
Yes.
And that is something we've brought up before in your previous episodes. So my first question to you, to kind of break the ice on this one, is, in your experience, what are like the main, pressuring things that writers have to deal with?
Probably deadlines, like depending on the project. Like if it's a self-imposed deadline, it's easier to push back. But when you have like editors you're working with or editing partners, it's a lot easier to be held accountable. So it's a lot more pressure as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's so real. And I remember thinking when I was younger, when I was considering what type of publishing I wanted to do, or whether or not I was going to publish, I distinctly remember thinking to myself, I don't know if I could do all this on a deadline, on somebody else's deadline.
Yeah, it's
Like,
hard.
what if they want what if they want double what I can do, and half the time it takes me to do half of it? Like,
yeah, it can be daunting. Even I've done 6 short stories now under deadlines, and it's the same pressure each time.
so like, what as an indie novelist, right, with self-imposed deadlines, I do find myself occasionally pushing them back more often than I would like.
Yeah.
But I find that for me, the business is very much, try to meet your deadline. Push the deadline back if you need to make additions to the story, edits to the story, to add some other quality of value to it. And I'm like very curious about the process of looking at a project and knowing you only have a certain amount of time to do this and what
Yeah.
that might be able to like bring out of it. Like, does it change the way you think creatively when you're in that situation?
Oh, definitely. Like you said, self-imposed, you get to push it back. If you're working with other people, you don't get that luxury. So
Yeah.
especially if it's like submission based. Obviously, the deadline's the deadline, the cut-off's the cut-off. But even when I'm working with editing partners, you have your set deadlines. So there's a responsibility that you have on yourself to meet those deadlines, to make sure their workload's fair as well, not just your own. But it's very stressful, and it does narrow everything you're doing to make it more streamlined. You can't faff and put off the project.
Right. Do you ever look at, and please let us know if there's like a particular project that comes to mind, but do you ever look at a project you wrote on a deadline and think this would have come out very, very different had I been able to just work on my own deadline?
I think so. I think most of like, especially like, I've written 6 short stories for Coagulation, and every time I write one, I always feel like a little bit afterwards. Maybe I could need to revise it a little bit.
Mm,
Maybe I can do a revised version and publish that. But I also know that if I hadn't had those deadlines, I probably wouldn't have written anything.
mm,
So a lot of these
that's a
short
great thought.
stories only come about because of it. So
Yeah,
it kind of helps streamline it and keep it to the word count that it needs to be.
that's very interesting actually, because yeah, it's what am I trying to say here? The fact that a deadline can actually prompt you to do something you would otherwise put off. I'm the same way, the exact
Yeah.
same way. There was a time in my life where I got nothing done because I just didn't have the proper motivation to do it. And so have these deadlines ever like um so we talked a little bit about how, you would want to revise something, but have they ever allowed something to blossom in a way that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of my works, what I've done, it's simply because of the tightness of the deadline, because I have to get it done. I actually think about the structure of the story more. So
Mm,
I'm not filling it out. I'm literally just trying to get it done. So things a little bit quicker to the point. And I think personally that's how I prefer to write. So
mhm.
it helps me in my writing style. I feel I need to be held accountable.
Yeah, well, you and me both. I just finished a draft of a manuscript that came out to 200,000 words,
Whoa.
and I was shoot.
I can do that.
Andrew, who helps out a lot with the shows, and of course is my co-pilot at One True Promotion. He, I've heard him swear. He swears a lot less than he used to, but I've also heard him say, wow, or my God, or no, you're kidding. But when I told him the number of words in that manuscript, he said, "Holy moly."
Yeah.
And he never
No.
says "holy moly." This was the moment I knew I'd messed up. So
Yeah.
so but yeah, but anyway, so why I bring that up is after that I wrote a shorter project.
Yeah.
I went into a new project and I really had more of a minimalist mindset with it. And I was surprised at how look at something more concise from
Yeah.
myself. It's a feeling that's hard for me to describe. I feel like it's almost easier to when you're writing something short, it's almost easier in a way to pay extra attention to the language of the story. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what like was your first big lesson with this or experience rather?
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, like the need to wanting to revise stuff normally comes from the fact that it's like my earliest ever published stuff. So
Yeah.
there's always that need of that's always the thing I do. I look at something, I immediately want to edit it. But when I've got this
Mhm.
deadline, once I've submitted it, I can't. So that does help me and stops me from doing
Right.
that. But yeah, like choosing the right language. I've explored minimalism more recently in some of my
Mm.
short stories, and just being able to write it and get those drafts done, it really does help with minimalism. Even
Mhm.
though, like some people say, minimalism is saying the same thing but in a different way each time, which I quite like. But yeah, it really does force me to remind myself what structure I'm using or what language I'm using. So like
Mm.
my first short story was like more Victorian, so the language had to be more formal because it was written by someone who was upper class, and that I had one which was more like, it was cyberpunk,
Mm,
hard-boiled detective, so that was a lot more slang words, straight to the point.
mm.
So it was writing very different experiences, but also it forced me to keep in that structure and to cut a lot of stuff out, which may have just been filler.
Wow, awesome. This might seem like a bit of a silly question, but I really am curious just to really get into the nuts and bolts of it. Like, how do you know? So you have a Victorian story, you have a
Yeah,
cyberpunk story.
yeah.
How do you know what type of language to match to each idea? Like, where do you get your knowledge base for that?
Well, I think being British, so when I wrote my Victorian, I was like, how posh could I possibly get?
Right.
So I kind of just put that in a little bit more. But I tend to just read other people's works from, like, say, the Victorian. I read a lot of books written in the Victorian era, and I
Mm,
just tried to see how they kind of structured some of their language, and I tried to
mm,
copy that a little bit, not fully because I don't want to copy someone else's work. But with, like, the detective novel, I just knew that it had to be very quick to the point. They're
mm,
quite a common person, if that's the right word to use, so their language isn't super duper complex.
mhm.
So, and because they're telling a story, they're just getting it out of the way rather than trying to draw us into this world. It was just them stating facts. So it was a
Mm.
lot easier for me to do that.
And do you do a lot of research before you go into different genres?
I tend to. Sometimes I already know bits about each genre, but if I didn't, like with cyberpunk, I was like, I've seen more films than I've read books of
Hmm.
cyberpunk. But it was a lot easier. It was a lot. Well, I would say it's easier. There's more research available for cyberpunk because it's more new and fresh. So
Mm,
there's a lot more videos on it and a lot more other novels you can read. It's more accessible in a way.
mm.
So
What are
that
some
helps.
What are some of your favorites?
Well, at the time I was writing it, I was actually playing the new Cyberpunk 2077
All
game,
right.
which really helped me get visual, like imagine the world my character was in.
Hmm.
Obviously they weren't in the same place, but the neon signs and like the Blade Runner style, I could just put on the film and go, oh, I want to copy that. How would I describe that? So I
Mm,
had a lot more visual aids when it came to that.
nice. Very nice. When you were delving into other genres and ways of speaking, was there ever um, were you ever surprised to learn something?
Yeah, I wrote a story in second person,
Mm,
and I realized that the present tense has two ways of writing it, which really, like, for me, you can use them interchangeably, but people tend to use one or the other. I was a little bit surprised when I read that because I just thought you just present tense is present tense, but it's very easy to fall back into the standard, past tense way of writing, which most
yeah.
books are written in. So I had to keep making sure I'd written it the right way.
Yeah. For the uninitiated, can you tell us a little bit about second person?
So second person is using, like, instead of like he does this, it was like you do this, a bit
Hmm.
like choose your own adventure kind of.
Yeah,
It's
like
more
the
common than that.
narrator is watching you.
Yeah, so it was I found it really fun to write because you don't get much stuff like that anymore. um
No.
so it was also hard to convey feeling though, because I can't
Mm.
tell someone how they're feeling.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like, see, I've always wanted to try second person, and I feel like I will in time. It's not something, so I have like a list of projects that I've been working on for publication. I've been planning them since like 2011.
Yeah.
And I often say I'm working to get to the point where I'm no longer backlogged.
Yeah.
And I could just like think of something and write it and be like, I came up with this yesterday. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I would love to write in second person. And I feel like for me, it would probably be like if I wanted to convey emotion, the first thing that comes to mind is a love note
Yeah.
or a note to an ex-lover, maybe. You know what I mean? It's like, and
Yeah.
when you did such and such, and you blah blah blah, blah and you ripped my heart out of my chest. It's like you're speaking to the other person, but you're
Yeah.
really getting so much from the speaker.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot different because you have to think of who is saying these things. I'm saying them to you, but who is the person behind the words? So there's almost like two characters you write in.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is fun. It's fun, but it's also really challenging. Like it's one of those styles of writing where, as you said, all of a sudden you're doing multiple jobs at once.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's So with like Breathless, which I wrote in second person, it's set in space and it's like the last minutes of an astronaut. Is very much is it. I had to work out if it was the astronauts saying this to themselves or if it was just someone else almost witnessing it. I still haven't decided. It's kind of a mixture of both.
Mm.
But I had to be mindful that I was making sure I was conveying it without telling the audience how they should feel.
Right, because and that's another thing actually. One thing that was confusing for me in my early books as I tried to, improve my craft was really, and it didn't help that I was writing big books because all of a sudden you got to do this in a million chapters, but
Yeah.
trying to figure out what do they mean by show don't tell. Like
Oh yes.
originally when I was showing, like people were telling me, wow, your books are like movies, you should be a screenwriter. I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not a screenwriter, I'm a novelist, damn you.
Yeah.
Like, don't say that to me. I wrote a book, but it's like, but that was the thing. You think of show at first and you're like, well, I should just tell nothing, show everything.
Yeah, it can be difficult.
But it's like you said, as we continue, we kind of learn that showing is also like just conveying between the
Yeah.
lines of something. It's not telling the audience how they should feel. It's making the audience feel something because the words you're using paint with a brush between every line, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. It is very hard. My most recent short story, I really struggled with show, don't tell. And I
Mhm,
really wanted to push myself to not tell anyone how the character was feeling. And
mhm.
there came a point where I was like, I feel like I have to do it once because
Yeah,
I can't work out the workaround from it.
right.
But I tried to just more explain what they were thinking of rather than their emotion. So the audience still knows the emotion because you would recognize it, but I'm not telling you what the emotion is. And I'm not sure if I've succeeded or not. I'll have to wait till people read it, but
Mhm.
it was more challenging.
I mean, one of my favorite examples from an old book. So, growing up, I was a huge fan of Hunchback of Notre Dame
Yeah.
and Les Miserables. And of course, I started reading a little bit of Victor Hugo, which is hard.
Yeah.
Um, Victor Hugo to me writes some of the most beautiful prose I've ever seen, but man, can he digress?
Oh
I mean,
yes.
there's an entire book in Les Mis that's just the history of the place we're about to see Valjean go to. It's like, when are the characters coming
Too
back?
much. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But anyway, in Hunchback, one of my favorite examples of conveying a feeling, and this is a sadly, pretty racist example, but when Hugo as the poet Grimoire is describing Esmeralda for the first time, and he's zeroing in on all these extravagant details about the person, goes for about 2 whole paragraphs just describing this absolute beauty of a person. And then at the end of all that said, when Grimoire sees that she has a Romani person's pendant, in the book he uses the term gypsy, um, he says the illusion was shattered. And he
Yeah.
doesn't elaborate on why. It's just that from that one sentence, the fact that a piece of paraphernalia about her culture somehow just ruins,
It ruins that. Yeah.
turns it into an illusion. He says it in a sentence, he doesn't elaborate on it, but you know exactly what that sentence means. And that always stood out to me. I was like, wow, that's how you build up to convey, a plot centric thought.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, like obviously the example nowadays is a bit more, but yeah, I think even the way he wrote it, like you said, you're building up something, and then it can be one sentence. Because even if whether we agree with him or not, you understand how
Yeah.
that character feels,
Right.
which is very,
Right.
very, well done.
Yeah, and I mean, he's only thinking that because of the culture that he's been groomed into.
Yeah,
Like you quickly learn about this poet character as the chapters go on that he's kind of dim-witted. Like he
yeah,
doesn't actually have any opinions about the Romani people himself. He's just kind of going with the trends.
going with what
So
he's
it's
been
like,
told. Yeah,
right. So it's just like, but all of that is right there in that sentence still, because you can tell he's kind of dim-witted, thinking the way he's thinking.
yeah,
It's like, yeah, man, it's a girl. Glad you're excited about it.
yeah,
So, um, But yeah, so yeah, I really enjoy that as well. So you published in coagulation, right? Remind us what coagulation is.
Yeah, so Coagulation Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Washington. My amazing friend Cora does it. She's basically my adoptive sister, but
Mhm.
she does so well to like get authors from mainly queer authors, but anyone from marginalized backgrounds to be able to publish their works out, all horror themed, and just basically break down some walls to traditional publishing, get some stories out which normally may not, be published in other places, and just allow us to basically create any piece of work we want to, really.
That's awesome. I really appreciate what Coagulation Foundation does because I really the older I get, the more I see, the more important I think that all is. How did you first hear about them?
So I've known Cora before they did it, but when they told me what they were doing and they asked me if I wanted to come along, I jumped at the opportunity because I hadn't been
Mm,
published yet. And obviously, it's only recently they got their 50C31 status. I have to
that's
remember it because it's
awesome.
it's an American term. So to me, I'm just like it's a non-profit, but I know it's very
Right.
specific. But a lot of hard work went into that, and like we have a really good editing team.
Awesome.
We have very collaborative. We all like support each other. Make sure we're all sticking to the same themes and everything. But yeah, it's grown really well, and everyone's really happy with it. Or I know I am at least.
That's amazing. And you so like what I want to know is like where were you when you were first invited to join? Like how big a moment was this for you? Yeah.
That was an amazing moment. I've been like working on Beyond for a little while in a draft which no longer exists because the
Mhm.
story's changed so much. But and I was really aching just to get something published so I could prove to myself that I could get something published. So when I
Mhm.
got asked to do it and I got asked if I wanted to submit, it was the first time I felt that I was a writer.
Mm.
And like I got a tattoo to commemorate it and everything. So
That's
it's my first,
awesome.
yeah, it's my first ever written piece of work, and from then it's kind of like just snowballed, and now it's a place where I definitely hone my writing abilities a lot better.
Amazing. That's awesome. Writing communities, is also a subject we touch upon here on the podcast. We haven't touched upon it as much yet, but it's something we're going to gear up in time because it's so important. I mean, even the small community we have here at One True Promotion with Andrew and I and our collaborators, Nick, Brielle, and Cameron, we've met people on the road who have looked at us and just said, "This is incredible. Nobody has this.
Yeah,
Nobody. You guys have no idea how lucky you are." And I'm really starting to see it the more I look back.
yeah, I think everyone wants that community, and everyone's just, I think, waiting for someone else to create it. So
Yeah.
when people do finally get up and go, you know what, I'm going to do this. I can see the need for it. It's a moment where I think everyone just wants it.
And can you tell us like what kind of challenges Cora faced? Like if somebody wants to go out and take up this mission themselves right now, like what are like the roadblocks that they can run into?
I think in terms of like organization, obviously, again, I don't know the American way of doing things, but obviously, just organization, getting
Mm,
people to be able to obviously like we've organized this today, but obviously getting like 10 plus writers, some
mm.
who live in America, some who live in Europe, make sure we can all meet up occasionally. It's quite a challenge.
Yeah.
And then obviously when it comes to actually production and editing, making sure that you have got the time and you're not overdoing it. And
Hmm.
you've got your number which works for the publication, and you've got that quality throughout it. I think
Yeah.
that's the main challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I was part of a writer's workshop for years, many years before Andrew and I formed One True Promotion. We were both part of the writer's workshop, actually. And for years, the biggest issue was scheduling.
Yeah.
And it was like, for us, it was interesting because we started with 3 people and then we steadily grew with time. And the more we grew, the harder it was to figure out how we were going to address everybody's stories on a time frame without making any one person wait for over a month. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it really like I mean, I have some cringe-inducing memories about the trouble we ran into with that. So I really can't even understate how much I empathize, you
Yeah,
know.
it's a challenge. The organization part, I would say, is a challenge. Obviously, I'm not in the trenches doing all that bit. I just submit, and but it's a challenge, and it's good. It's collaborative.
Hmm. Well, I love talking about Coagulation Foundation because I love what they do, but I couldn't help noticing you, madam, are the founder of In a Joy Books. I would
Yes,
love to hear more about that.
yes, that's actually really recent. I officially like registered it in May, but I haven't really done anything with it till now, just because again, paperwork and admin and legal stuff is just so it's mind-numbingly boring. But it's a queer bookshop. It's going to be online once the website's built, and it's a place where anyone could submit. So if you've got anything you want to submit, we will, if you need us to edit it, we can edit it for
Yeah.
you. But it's mainly a place where you can put your book up, and it's a website for everyone to come to, and it's we discuss prices with you and everything. We just work out that boring stuff, but then you got a place where
Yeah.
you can sell your works, whether it's a novel or a zine or artwork. It's somewhere where people who haven't been able to break through in traditional publishing can break down those walls and get published.
That's amazing. I hope I'm not striking too far out of the park here,
No, not at all.
but I mean, I would really love to get into this, pending your level of comfort with the
Yeah, of
subject.
course.
But we have just these attacks on LGBTQ books going on
Yes.
everywhere. We just have this, in my opinion, my personal opinion, the kinds of stuff I'm hearing about to happen in democracies. We have just these crazy just book burning things going on right now.
It's weird.
It's excessive. It's an escalation of a larger problem, in my opinion. And I just feel like what you do is so vital. Can you speak to the overall importance of it?
I think like it's really hard to get into traditional publishing anyway. There's so many barriers, and it's quite there's a lot of gatekeeping, and it is nowadays it's all algorithms and what's seen as profitable. So artistic creativity is kind of getting watered down. So I wanted to create somewhere where that didn't apply, and you put it on, and if your book sells, it sells. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But the author doesn't lose out on anything. It's a place where they can publish. But I think the whole point is, it's meant to be artistic freedom, and
Mhm.
especially with the queer community, it's a lot harder to do that. We are, unfortunately, in the UK at least, there's more places willing to take chances, but even then, it's still getting those chances to begin with.
Mhm.
So you still have
Yeah.
to be the right kind of story. So you still have those limitations. Where I wanted to create a place where go nuts, just submit whatever you want.
And I mean, on the flip side of the gatekeeping that is the traditional publishing industry, for context, one of our guests who really helped drop a line, pick up steam, Ivy Now, she was on, geez, I guess it was 3 years ago now. Oh, I'm getting old. But, she was a award-winning, traditionally published author twice.
Yeah,
And she was asking me for my tips on getting into independent publishing,
yeah.
and which was a was world altering for me, because I realized that the way the indie publishing market has grown, traditionally published authors actually have interest in it. And on the flip side of that, there's challenges there too. I find that the indie market is so saturated with these self-made creatives that it can be really hard to find your niche in it sometimes.
Yeah, I think like obviously the main marketplaces are places like Amazon,
Yeah.
where unless you know specifically what you're looking for, it's easy to get lost. Which is why, like, although my website will be, it's going to be smaller, you're going to know everything about it. It's going to be
Yeah.
queer stories by queer authors. Obviously, the genre might then change, whether it's horror, romance, thriller, crime, drama,
Right.
whatever it is. But you know what you're getting when you go there, so you're not going to get lost in this cloud of
Yeah.
hashtags and stuff, which you can on Amazon.
Yeah, and hashtags and ads, and
Yeah,
just all these other authors that you can get your book published, but you're going to be what you're really trying to do is to get into a community somewhere, and that's something you're providing at
I'm
off the
hoping
bat.
to.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think you have a great formula there because, like I was trying to figure out the genre for my latest book, and I was thinking to myself, should I find an urban fantasy community, a dark fantasy community? Should I get involved with D&D somewhere? Maybe that's the key. But it's all these maybes. But people in this book burner time we're living in, who are looking to tell queer stories and get
Yeah.
queer stories out there and read and heard. I mean, they'll be able to come to you. I think that is
Yeah.
tremendous.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I find obviously being in the UK we don't have it as much, but looking at the censoring that's going on in the US, it's quite daunting, especially since I can get a lot of these books from my local library. So there's a massive disconnect between the two countries.
Yeah. Oh, I'll say. I mean, you can. Unfortunately, at this point, you can see that when you turn on the TV. Now, it used to be. It used to be that you had to really get into it for it to become readily apparent. But now
Yeah.
it's just like just the common thread of discourse just exemplifies that divide. It's kind of remarkable.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah. But I can definitely confirm that I know people here that would just go nuts for that service. So I mean, I think that is tremendous. Yeah. You have a particular passion for horror, right?
I do, yes.
Yes. So there might be some listeners that don't know you as well as I do. So, can you take us back to the roots of that?
I've always enjoyed horror because I think it's it's scary. It elicits an emotion quite quickly. Um, Mainly, I got into it through films, and then I read more books because I've always been
Mhm.
like a bit of a film nerd. But I've always enjoyed reading, so they kind of matched perfectly. But anything that elicits that kind of emotion, because horror is so broad, you can do a lot with it.
Yeah.
It's so different.
I remember I had missed Alien because I was always scared of horror movies as a kid. I avoided them all my life. And
Yeah,
I watched my first horror movie at 18. So Andrew sat me down one day and he showed me Alien 1 and 2. And what stood out to me was how the first one, as I expected, was a very well done just horror film. One
yeah,
alien trapped in a small confined space, just picking them off one by one. But then the second one turned out to be this awesome sci-fi action movie.
yeah. But it's weird because both are kind of like they're both horrors. The
Yeah,
first one definitely. The second one's more like horror thriller,
but
or
broad,
horror
like you
action.
said, it's
But
all
yeah,
so broad. It can go in so many directions.
yeah, that's the thing. It's you can do a lot with it. You can add a lot to it, and there's obviously a lot of discussion about what is horror and what isn't. But you
Mhm.
know, anything can be horror. I think if you
Amazing.
if you write it the right way.
Well, yeah, yeah. If you write something, um, I was watching the movie The Big Short.
Yes. Oh, I
Um,
love that film.
yeah, great.
I class it as a horror film.
Yeah, exactly. That's what, it was so funny in the beginning, but when the reality of what they were discussing there, the realities of
Yeah.
the economic downturn turned in and the memories that suddenly kicked in, it's like I was laughing, now I'm not. This is a horror
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah. It's a weird horror movie, but I still
Yeah.
class it as horror.
But yeah, like you're so right. It really is a broad genre. It's all about eliciting emotions. I really love
Yeah.
that perspective of horror. So, what was the goal with Beyond? What kind of horror was that supposed to be?
Psychological, emotional horror, I would say. It's less. I have got like a little bit of body horror in it just to like
Mm,
get the blood pumping a bit more in the reader and give them something visceral, but it's mainly an exploration of like grief and trauma and how
mm.
that affects people.
And what kind of response did it get when you started, trading notes with people and introducing them to these characters and these, ideas and feelings?
Yeah, well, when I sat down, I spoke to someone about the outline. Um, I got a really strong positive response, which made me feel really good about myself that I was
Mm-hmm.
actually writing something coherent because it went through a lot of changes.
Mm-hmm.
So when I actually sat down and I shared it and I went through my notepad with all my outline, I got that really strong response of, oh, I can see these themes coming through. I was like, fantastic because that's what I wanted. And it
Mm.
can be quite hard to write themes if you don't quite get it right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I learned that lesson with Children of Arc actually. It went through that's the most recent book that Carrie and I put out. It went through tremendous editing just because the reactions I was getting. Um, I had written every word of the story that I had always planned to, but the emotions were just not coming across.
Yeah.
And I was actually that was a blow to my ego. I was like, what? I didn't even know I was capable of messing up this bad.
It,
So it's
it's difficult because you don't want to over edit,
yeah.
but you sometimes need to work it out.
Yeah, I mean, what it really taught me was that, you know, like I think that in places I was trying to be a little too niche,
Yeah.
like I had the main character do a lot of not talking because I wanted
Oh,
to show how traumatized and agoraphobic and withdrawn into himself that he was, which can work maybe visually if you can read a person.
yeah.
But yeah, no, all the feedback I got basically said, listen, this is a book. I need a little more words in this scene. I'm like, okay. But it really just tuned me into the power of words and how in books it's the words that elicit an emotion, you know?
Yeah, I think like my two most recent short stories, I got quite a strong emotional response from people, which made me feel really good about myself. I think that was the issue I had with my first one. I was like, the emotion's there, but it's not really super strong, which is
Hmm.
why I kind of want to revise it. But I'm happy with it. But it's
Yeah,
that thing of like, yeah, I feel like I've definitely improved since.
absolutely. And that's what happens, you know, the more we do it, the more we improve. It really feels to me like writing is a muscle more than anything else.
Yeah, the more you write, I've managed to go to a few writer workshops by someone wonderful called KR Moorhead, and they do these
Mhm.
amazing workshops, both online and occasionally in person. And just having that community there and being able to ask questions with people who have either been published or they used to teach creative writing, and they still do teach creative writing, but being able to pick their brain and stuff has really helped.
Awesome. Um, when I asked earlier about pressure, you know,
Yeah.
deadlines, you know, they come to mind right away, of course. Deadlines, they add on the pressure. But I've also had like emotional pressure throughout my career.
Oh, yeah, you get
Yeah.
there's a lot, like especially when you're trying to balance writing with personal life and other things you want to do. um it can be really difficult. I had to stop writing a short story. Well, I stopped writing a novel because the character, when I'm trying to justify their actions in their own head, made me quite a negative person.
Mm.
So that put an emotional toll on me. So I had to like scrap it for a little while. I haven't gone back to it since. I'm still
Yeah.
finding the strength to go back, but it can be quite
Yeah. I
difficult.
mean, it is. I mean, part of the reason that the Calipar was born before the Meridian trilogy was complete, the first book of the Meridian trilogy was my debut, was because I got to a point in life where I couldn't write the lead character anymore.
Yeah, I've been
Um,
there.
yeah, I mean, the if you haven't read it yet, the main character, Justin Barker, he is a serial murderer. He's a very nasty, you know, pathological one. It was a psychological experiment for myself to see how in it I could get as a
Yeah,
character creator. And it was fun at first, but there came this time in my life where I was waking up because of situations in a dark place. And when I tried to go into that story, I just felt it. I felt like this is
yeah,
horrible. I don't want to be here. Like,
yeah. I scrapped one of my coagulation stories because of that. Like completely changed what I was writing because the headspace I was in was quite bad at the time. So I
mm,
was putting that into my writing, and then it got to that point where I'm like, I feel like it's just this vicious circle going round.
mm,
But I don't think the story is anything productive. It's just like a vomit of emotions, and it's really
right.
negative. And I'm like, this isn't healthy for anyone.
Mm,
So it took a bit of pressure off mentally to be able to get it down on paper. But then I just thought, wow, that's not something anyone would ever want to read.
mm. Yeah, I mean, that's the second part, right? You know, it's just like you summed it up beautifully. We can get it down on paper, we can get it out, but then we have to ask ourselves, is this something I want other people to see?
Yeah,
Yeah, like how would this hit a reader? Would it be therapeutic to them, or would it be just triggering? Like, what's the nature of this thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think it was anything coherent in the end. I just thought it was a lot of like I can make it into a story, I guess, but I was really struggling to move the plot forward.
Mm.
So I just thought I'm just gonna scrap it because it doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be written.
Now, have you ever found that something that went back to the shelf just to, um, fester a little bit longer, came back in a better form?
Yeah, I think my most recent short story, Lullaby,
Mm.
which is probably I think it's published now. It's kind of in the works, but it should be published. Yeah, it's published now. That was one which it started off as another short story, and then it got scrapped, and then it came out as this instead. So it definitely changed. And even the one before it, which I cannot remember the name of, Only Love Lost,
Mm.
that started out as a different short story and put on the shelf. Then eventually I published it as something slightly different, but it definitely had improved by putting it on the shelf.
So there's always hope, right?
I think so. I think sometimes, projects stay on the shelf, and I think other times you just need to work on your writing and work out what you need to do to help it move forward.
Yeah, it's either that you've outgrown it or you just need to grow into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes, we struggle to write because I've done it before when I started writing a novel called Imogen, and it was about a detective who goes on the hunt for a serial killer. And I knew the beginning and I knew the end, but not the middle.
Mm.
Or I knew parts of the middle, but not how they went from like A to B. So that really had to go on the shelf for a little while, and I've kind of outlined it a bit more now. But it needed that rest
Mm.
for me to be able to make the changes needed.
Amen to that. I love that. We're going to take a short break to thank our sponsors and all that, but we will be right back with you very shortly.
Yeah.
Hope you are enjoying Drop a Line. A little background on me. I am a fiction author, first published in 2017 with Seven Horns Publishing. My name is Alec Pangia. You are listening to Pen Night Radio. This is the Drop a Line segment featuring wonderful, wonderful interviews with guests. This guest in particular is Helena Key, an amazing horror author and thriller author, and just author in general, who has a lot of wisdom about writing under pressure and writing between the lines. Helena is also launching a book publishing service for authors who want to tell queer stories in multiple genres. And it's just really, really awesome to have Helena here. My debut novel is Barker's Rules, a suspense thriller. Oh my goodness, I actually said it right this time. Thriller, pitting teen Melanie Greer against the superhuman serial killer Justin Barker. Melanie Greer is kidnapped by a traveling serial killer and brought to the chilling ghost town of New Haven, Washington. Suddenly thrust into a desperate fight for survival, Melanie struggles to contend with Justin Barker's 3 rules and 3 chances to break them. I left Seven Horns in 2019 to pursue independent publishing with One True Promotion, a promotion brand I co-founded and share with authors Andrew Bass and our collaboration team, Nicholas Georgel, Brielle Elise, and Cameron Coates. One True Promotion is sponsor of Pen Night Radio as well as Drop a Line and is dedicated to platforming you. And we're back. Thank you very much for being here again. And hope I didn't misrepresent you in my description there.
Not at all, not at all.
Beautiful. Helena, how has writing and writing under pressure, we talked a lot about that tonight, but how has just the whole journey really, changed your life personally?
I think for the better, a lot of community. I've started doing like poetry events and stuff now, writing some poetry, which is also very different pressure and deadlines. But you meet so many amazing people, different from all over the world as well. And everyone you meet loves writing. Sometimes there's authors who you may not always like their work, but you like them as a person, which is always wonderful to make friends. And obviously you support each other, you make suggestions to each other, so it's really nice.
That is, that really is. And do you feel like, before writing and publishing, these thoughts were there, just kind of festering?
Yeah, I think before I actually spoke to people and got the confidence to show my work off, it was kind of like I always thought like I can do this, but maybe I can't do this, and now I know I can do it. But yeah, they were definitely stuck in my head.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's actually pretty deep. Like, if you never went out and talked to somebody and just learned how much we all have in common and how these thoughts take root in all of our minds, you might look at some of these things that, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be horror. It's just that overstimulation of the mind and that chaos of all these different characters being up here. And
Yeah,
you could almost think, what is it about me? Like, why does my mind work this way? Is there something off? Like,
yeah. For some of the villains I've written, I'm like they're quite despicable people. I do question my sanity sometimes.
yeah, it's like, what does that say about me? But then you go out into community and you learn about other people and you connect all the dots and you learn about just, the stimulation of the brain and the electric signals and all that and the way creativity takes shape. And you realize I'm normal. I'm a
Yeah,
member of this community.
yeah. We're all crazy here, so it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Or we're just all crazy.
Yeah.
But I just think that's so vital and wonderful. It really sounds like, you've had kind of an eclectic career already, just for the way you've been able to find community and get out there.
Yeah, it's really nice when you meet people that you can like they promote you and you can promote them and you kind of just writing is not very competitive at all.
Mhm.
Everyone's looking out to collaborate and support one another, which is really nice.
Yeah, it is really nice. I was actually surprised. Drop a Line, when I first started the interviews like 4 years ago now, was really what clued me into the fact that all of us are here for a common purpose. Just these conversations over and over and over again. It was like, oh my goodness, you're my brother, you're my sister.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow, this is all of us. I think that's remarkable.
Yeah, it's really nice. Even when I've done it when I've written a very similar short story to someone else. I haven't published it, but we've then discussed it. Instead of it being competitive, it was like, oh, I like your version. Oh, I like your version.
Yeah.
And it was just because we both got given the same like theme to do.
Yes.
Sheer luck, we didn't even realize, but it was just really nice to be able to share that and be like, oh, I didn't think of writing it that way.
Yeah. And how good a genre do you think horror is for reader interpretation?
Oh, I think it's very good. I think like a lot of old stories like U Turn the Screw, which is now Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix, which originally was very more like, was it horror? Did any of it happen? Even like things like American Psycho, which is very much up in the air with about what's real and what's not. And then you get your more, you know, to the point horror like Dracula when you know what it is. So
Mm.
there's a lot you can do with it.
Absolutely, yeah. I actually have a ambition to write about some vampires in my future.
Yeah.
In a kind of a self-contained, well, broad but self-contained mythology that a lot of stories are going to be a part of. And I was so like just not feeling it at first, because of True Blood and
Yeah.
Twilight and Vampire Diaries and this and the way Supernatural did vampires here, like just so much, so much. Like there was a voice in my head saying, "The audacity on you! What do you mean you're going to write a vampire?" So,
Yes, it can be scary.
so I went and I looked up, what makes vampires good. I don't know if that's what I typed in, but that was what I came to. It's like, how do you write vampires well? And they immediately brought me to Dracula. and
Yeah.
why I bring it up. And they immediately talked about how Dracula was not a creature of the night. Dracula was an aristocrat who
Yeah.
sucked the blood of the impoverished.
Yeah.
And I read that and I was like, wow, I get it.
Yeah, I think vampires, it's so broad, everyone's got their own version, but I think most
Mhm.
people do come back to Dracula, at least for
Yeah.
the, foundation of it. I struggle with certain takes on vampires, like Twilight, to name one,
Right. Right.
at least they tried, the author, Stephanie Meyer, tried to do something different, which was refreshing.
Absolutely. And yeah, and the thing that wowed me was that, like when I think Dracula, I think, oh, fangs, blood,
Yeah,
funny accent.
yeah,
But no, it was like, oh, this is talking about how much of a just wealth sucker he is, how he elevates himself and everything around him is just dying. Like it just like came crashing down on me.
yeah. I think Dracula's really interesting because there's a lot of like real life historical context behind it.
Hmm.
So it's very you can draw a lot from it. So I think Europeans, we've got a lot of medieval, Middle Ages history to draw upon for like Dracula and stuff, and it's
Yeah.
very interesting the takes that have been brought out by different authors.
Yeah. Do any of like those classic horror characters ever inspire anything you put in the books or short stories?
I think I don't know like the specific characters, but I definitely like the main villain and beyond. They're quite formal and they've
Mm,
got very certain way of doing things. So I think a little bit of Dracula in the terms of like they think they're better than everyone.
mm,
Or so sometimes it's more the caricatures rather than the characters that
right.
seep in.
Yeah. And to give an example myself, like the more I think about it, the more I look at, the Demon Knight in Calipar,
Yeah,
the guy who's, harnesses the blade of a demon and becomes very wild. Justin Barker, the superhuman serial killer who is just violent and hostile and this and that and always going out at night. I'm like, I see a lot of the Wolfman in everything I do.
yeah.
Seriously, like something about the werewolf just set something off in my head. It's a while back.
Yeah, I think like we there's always like those foundations that we draw upon, even if we don't realize it. But yeah, I think with a lot of my short stories, there's been probably characters which people go, oh, that's like so and so.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I mean, I think I really personally feel like there's inspiration for everything. But on the podcast in a previous episode, I tried to encourage people that they were worthy of publishing because if they feel like their idea is too derivative of something, they're just beginning the coal mining process.
Yeah,
They're mining a diamond by just honing in on what makes it special. And really, to me, that's what creativity is. It's just writing it down, looking at what you think actually sticks out as an interesting detail, and just starting to lean into those aspects.
yeah, absolutely. I think if someone writes, then they're a writer. I don't think there's
Hmm.
anything more than I think there's a lot of gatekeeping within the
Yeah.
writing community, but I think once you kind of get past it and you realize it doesn't actually mean anything, you're a writer. If you write a short story, whether
Amen.
it's published or not, you're a writer.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And yeah, I made the episode in response to just a number of people that have given me these elaborate, wonderful outlines. And I'm just like, wow, when are you going to publish that? And they're like,
Yeah,
oh, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, come on. You're a writer, for God's sake. This is
yeah,
amazing. But
it's a lot of I think a lot of self doubt comes into writers. I think we all have imposter syndrome, but I think that helps our creativity because we're our worst critics.
yeah, and it gets exacerbated by the fact that, the successful world gatekeeps.
Yeah,
It's like, come on, like there's no rite of passage here. Like you said, if
no,
you're a writer, you write.
I've got nothing against like traditional publishing. I just know how hard it is to get into. But so like
Yeah,
kudos to anyone who can break through those walls and get published. But it's normally who you know rather than what you've written. I find.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the bottom line of it. It's so true. But I think what you do is awesome because like I said, you know, there's for one thing, you have just this wonderful mind, this wonderful creativity, and I think your stories are absolutely awesome. I just think that they stand out for how much you pour into them. and what you offer as an, a very niche, publisher, promoter to people who really need it. I just think that that is just a bright spot in the industry, really.
Thank you.
No, I really think that. I think that we should be using our art to find ways to be helping people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think art can bring a lot of people together. I
Mhm.
think, which is why it's such a shame with, obviously, like we mentioned earlier, the censoring and the book burning. It's kind of like restricting access to creativity and works that have been written.
Yeah, yeah, it's deep. It's a symptom of a very large, very complex, well, maybe not a complex problem, but a problem that has become complicated.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, I find, there are certain things that I have like a very short fuse with, and I never want to say it's complex. I'm like,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
so
It's weird. There's a lot of challenges that people are facing to try and get it, and there's a lot of obviously motivations behind the book burning and the censoring and stuff, which are
yeah.
hard to rip out at the root core.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes the books that they go after, it's like, you know, the way I was raised and the things that I thought were appropriate for certain age groups and whatnot. Like I can definitely understand where the arguments are coming from in some cases, but there are so many stories about how lack of access to knowledge and
Yeah,
understanding and like understanding of anatomy, et cetera, and so forth, have led people into situations where they couldn't speak up for themselves or defend themselves or advocate for themselves properly. And it's just like there are reasons that we want people, young people, to know their bodies, to know about all the different groups of people in the world, to know this history and that history. There are
yeah,
reasons.
yeah. We're trying to learn. We're trying to educate, and it's very difficult when there's other underlying motivations behind it, which you're trying to like battle at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the greatest thing is when, and this is true about some horror books, you can really be swept into it and inspired by it and stimulated by it. But when you see it really making an impact in somebody's life, like I had somebody tell me, I never expected this, but my book that people said was very suspenseful and just like a page turner really helped them through their recovery period.
Yeah,
And I was
I
just floored by that.
I wouldn't want. I personally wouldn't want any book banned. I'm reading a lot of like H.P. Lovecraft, and it is unfortunately a lot of racist caricatures
Mhm.
of people. But you read it understanding the context of when it was written,
Yeah.
so you don't cut it slack, but you understand the reasoning behind it, and you
Yeah.
can still disagree. But I still think his
Mhm.
views are completely wrong. But
Right.
I understand the process.
Right. And it's like they have that ability to captivate.
Yeah,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? They
That's the
captivate
really
your
annoying.
attention.
That's a really annoying thing. They're like wonderful stories with these little,
Yeah.
well, they're not little. They're these problems in them, which
Yeah.
sometimes take you out of it, or you just go, "Hey, the
Yes.
character is also racist."
Right.
So that's fine. It's a character.
Yeah. It can be distracting when, a character, a line, an image is just all too real. I mean, being the husband of, an African American woman, also an Italian,
Yeah.
I have like this love-hate relationship with The Godfather because I
Oh yeah.
love the damn movie. But there's a
Yeah.
couple lines in it where I'm like, hey, you don't say stuff like that.
Well, I recently I've read it about 5 times, and I've
Yeah.
recently reread it, and I was like, how did I not notice this the first five
Right.
times?
Right. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I
It's
can I
it's
couldn't even get
there.
by the first chapter. I was like, are they justifying this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I get it was the 50s, but surely even then it was problematic. Surely,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's like it's right there. It's
yeah,
out in the open. And you're so right. Until we've really had, so I guess in a way, this is part of the beauty of, like you mentioned about the Lovecraft books, going back and dealing with the uncomfortableness of it a little bit, because it kind of makes us just more hyper aware in
yeah.
general, right?
I think understanding how not to write something really
Yeah.
helps us improve how to write it further on.
Yeah. Amen to that. Absolutely. So that is just the tops, I think. Helena, this is amazing. We've had a 60-minute conversation already. You are so easy to talk to, I
Yeah,
swear.
it doesn't feel like it's been an hour.
No, it really doesn't. I only know that because I've been watching the clock. If somebody had tapped my shoulder and said it's been an hour, I would have been like, "You're crazy. Get out of here." I'm working here. Um, yeah. So like, what's next for you? What's coming up soon?
So coagulation is now being published, so that should be ready to read now. And I'm just working on Beyond mainly at the moment, actually putting the effort into that as well, along with Ina Joy books, but making sure my
Awesome.
own story also gets published and doesn't get lost in the ether.
Listen, I don't think it'll be lost. I think that you have such a sharp mind in general, in addition to your, the compassion and empathy that goes into everything you do. And those are two of the best tools, I think, for making sure that a job gets done,
Yeah,
because that job has a purpose and you're tuned into that purpose. So I think that, I have complete confidence in you, and I'm very excited to hear about coagulation. I'll have to support them.
yeah. Thank you. Much appreciated. To be honest, like it's such an amazing work that everyone there does.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what we do here at One True Promotion. We try to put the word out, just put the word out, bring people together, get them together on one forum. So we will definitely be interested in networking there. But it's been awesome having you. I swear, always.
Thank you. I'd love to come back, and it's honestly it's amazing talking to you.
It really is. And you are definitely good luck writing. Good luck
Thank
with
you.
all that you're doing. And, definitely we're always here to put up a post and promote and represent and shout out. Always. That's just what we do. You consider yourself part of the family.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Of course. Well, thank you for talking. And folks, this was Drop a Line. We will close out the show in a minute. But first, Helena, you have a good night and a
Thank you.
good
You too.
rest.
I will. Take care.
Take care. Thank you for listening to another episode of Pen Night Radio. To hear more about how we expand on this topic, I invite you to check out previous episodes of the podcast and send your own thoughts to Alec Pangia Author on Instagram or Instagram Threads, or Alec Pangia Drop a Line / the Calipar Fans on Facebook. Or you could hit me up on TikTok and message me there, or just tag me in a video and tell me what your response to the video was. Stay engaged with the podcast for your chance to appear as a guest and talking partner during a future episode that tackles your favorite topic. With all that said, it's time to go out to battle. Knights, right on.